Okay, sorry, we had trouble getting on.
Oh no, no worries. It's that our virtual age. I look forward to the point when I can welcome speakers like you on a stage side by side. But we're glad to have you to welcome you to East Carolina University this evening.
Oh, thank you.
So if you're ready, we're going to go ahead and jump in. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So again, my name is Mark Rasdorf. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the Senior Associate Director for Intercultural Affairs at ECU, where I oversee the Dr. Jesse R. Peel LGBTQ Center. On behalf of Intercultural Affairs, I want to welcome everyone who's joining us tonight, and most especially Dolores Huerta, our guest speaker. I'm also joined by Dr. Dennis McCunney, our Director of Intercultural Affairs. Dennis, did you want to say a few words of welcome?
Hi, everyone. Just want to say welcome, and a particular warm welcome to our speaker. So glad to have you with us and excited to hear from you this evening.
Thank you.
So this marks our first ever commemoration of Cesar Chavez Day.
Wow.
And we are honored to be joined by Dolores Huerta, whose work with Chavez was so important. So I just wanted to share a few words about the importance of March 31st. It was made by a federal commemorative holiday by President Obama back in 2015. And I want to share some words that Obama spoke as a senator in 2008. Chavez left a legacy as an educator, environmentalist, and a civil rights leader. And his cause lives on as farm workers and laborers across America continue to struggle for fair treatment and fair wages. We find strength in what Cesar Chavez accomplished so many years ago. And we honor him for what he's taught us about making a stronger, more just, and prosperous nation. And on a personal note, I was encouraged to see that one of the pieces of sculpture President Biden chose to have in the Oval Office is a bust of Cesar Chavez. Dennis?
So I'll just give a brief introduction of Dolores with a little bit of her bio. So Dolores Huerta is a civil rights activist and community organizer. She has worked for labor rights and social justice for over 50 years. In 1962, she and Chavez founded the United Farm Workers Union, where she served as vice president and played a critical role in many of the union's accomplishments for 4 decades. In 2002, Huerta received the Puffin Nation $100,000 prize for creative citizenship, which she used to establish the Dolores Huerta Foundation. This organization is on a mission to inspire and organize communities to build volunteer organizations empowered to pursue social justice. Huerta has received numerous awards, including the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award from President Bill Clinton in 1998, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012 from President Barack Obama. And you can learn more about the Dolores Huerta Foundation by visiting doloreshuerta.org. On a side note, as well as a personal note, I don't know if Dolores, if you remember back, I think it was in the 90s, there was a poster made of great human rights and social justice activists by Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So I have that poster in my office honoring you along with Spike Lee and Reverend Dan Berrigan and Bobby Seale and other activists. So excited to hear from you in person. So without further ado, we give you Dolores Huerta. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I am so jealous because I used to have that poster, of the Ben & Jerry's ice cream poster. And unfortunately, somehow it got lost. But anyway, it's great that you have that, especially now when we see that they just had that movie about the Black Panthers. I think it's called The Messiah, and I can't think of the rest of the name of it. But it's a really great movie. I recommend it to everyone so that they can also see that movie and take the lessons from that. And also the movie about Freddie Hampton. Oh, that was it. That was a movie about Freddie Hampton that talked about the Black Panthers. And then there's another movie about the Chicago 7, which also talks about the Panthers and the terms of the leader, Bobby Seale, who was one of the members of the Chicago 7, along with Tom Hayden and others who were arrested during the Democratic Convention in 1968 because they were protesting the Vietnam War, where, of course, a lot of young people were being killed. and young people came together to protest that. And eventually they ended the war with the protests that they made. And of course, thank you for celebrating Cesar Chavez's life, because I think that Cesar's life is really you might say it's kind of a lesson for everyone in many of the things that Cesar did, and things, of course, that all of us can borrow as we continue our journey for social justice for everyone. And so one of people always know about Cesar Chavez and what he did for the farm workers, but they don't realize that where Cesar learned his organizing techniques was actually in a previous organization called the Community Service Organization, CSO. And this was an organization that was started in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, where the Mexican-American people lived, there were no street lights. There were streets without curbs and gutters. There were no clinics. I mean, things were really, really bad there. And so one of the gentlemen that organized the people in East Los Angeles to kind of fix all of those conditions was a man named Fred Ross Sr. And Fred Ross was an Anglo. He was not a Latino, but he cared so much about the conditions of the Latino people that he helped organize them. And they were able to, and he partnered with some of the local leaders there. And so they were able to elect the first city councilman to the city of Los Angeles, a gentleman named Ed Roy Ball, who went on to the U.S. Congress and also made great changes, especially for elderly people. Then they also were able to bring everything that they needed into the barrios of the neighborhoods of East Los Angeles. So I know many of us live in rural areas like I do here in Bakersfield, California, and we have some of those same conditions that exist here. And I'm sure down there where many of you live, you also have the same condition. And oftentimes people think, well, there's nothing we can do about these infrastructure needs that we have in our communities. But what we did learn is that once you learn how to organize, you can really make those changes and improvements in your community. But one of the fundamental things that Cesar learned is that the way that you really have to make the changes is by passing laws, okay? And of course, in the farm worker movement, we did a lot of marches, we did a lot of strikes, we did a lot of boycotts. But ultimately, if you don't get something in the form of a law, legislation, then there's no way that you can be sure that that is being implemented, that people are going to be held accountable. And so that's really the basis of a lot of the work that Cesar and I did, because I also belong to that same organization. But during that tenure that we were in that organization, we had many members that were farm workers as the organization spread throughout California. And when we saw the needs of the farm workers, and I have to tell you how bad it was, and not only for farm workers in California, because I know there's farm workers and also where you're at, that sometimes they don't have the basic needs that they have. And so, and one of those basic needs that farm workers needed was just to have a toilet out in the fields. And if you can imagine, the farm workers are working out there in the fields. They're many, many miles away from the closest gasoline station or any kind of a public bathroom where they could go. And yet they were out there, all day long, often from sunup to sundown. So that was one of the things that the farm workers really, really needed. They were also not often provided the drinking water that they needed. They didn't have rest periods. They didn't have unemployment insurance. And that is money that you get when you go, when your work finishes and you have to follow the crops. But if you get a check, like when you're unemployed, then you don't have to migrate so much. You can stay in the same community. And especially that really affects the children because they don't have to be pulled out of school. So these are the things that, of course, the right to organize that farm workers didn't have. So these are some of the basic things that farm workers needed and wanted. But before we could even change that, the one thing that we had to teach the farm workers is that these conditions that you have right now and that you're complaining about, they're not going to change unless you have to commit and you have to volunteer to do the work to change them. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of fear. because farm workers knew that if they got engaged to build a union, that they would be fired, and that it would be very, very hard for them to find another job. So the first thing we had to do is to meet with them. And so we spent almost 3 years meeting with farm workers in their homes, explaining to them that they had the power to change things and that they could lose their fear and make it happen. And so little by little, family by family, we were able to get many of the farm workers to commit to make those changes and to have the courage to make the change, to step up and to stand up and to speak out. So the farm workers, they marched thousands of miles just to let everybody know what their issue was, and then to reach out to other farm workers to join them. Then they walked out of the fields and they went on strike. But then we couldn't win that strike. And the reason that we couldn't win the strike is because the bosses, the growers, they kept bringing more and more people in to break the strike. So we knew that we had to do something different. And so the thing that we did then is we had the farm workers go to different cities throughout the United States of America and ask people to support them and not eat any grapes. Oh, I forgot to mention that the strike that they had was on grapes. So they got a lot of people not to eat the grapes, and we had 17 million Americans, 17 million Americans all over the United States, all the way from New York City up to the Canadian border, down to the Mexican border, and people stopped eating grapes, okay? And we won. We finally won and got the growers to sit down at the table to sign those contracts. And those agreements that we signed meant that they had to have a bathroom, maybe not a room, but a porta potty in every field, one for men and one for women. And they had to give the workers that provide them the cold drinking water that they needed, give them the relief periods. Then subsequently, we got the law that they could have unemployment insurance and that they could organize into a union. So, but as I said before, we never could have gotten any of that in terms of legislation had we not done the basic work of registering people to vote, supporting good representatives through our state legislature that would pass the laws that we needed, like those that we won. And so that is kind of the basis, not only of what we were able to accomplish. Now, what made Cesar different from other leaders? Number one, he didn't have a college education. Cesar's family, because they were migrant farm workers, they actually owned their own property in Yuma, Arizona, but they lost their property during the Depression of the 30s, of the 1930s. So then that's how they became migrant workers. But Cesar always had it in his heart that he wanted to organize farm workers. So when we left that other organization that I mentioned, the CSO, and we began the United Farm Workers, he was able to make his dream come true. Now, because they had to migrate so much, Cesar never went to high school. He only got as far as the 8th grade. But he was very, very intelligent. He always carried a book in his hand. He was always reading. And the other thing that Cesar did, he always surrounded himself with people that he could learn from. He always people around him that he said or he thought were smarter than he was, which is pretty hard because Cesar was a very, very intelligent person. I like to call him a genius. And his commitment to organizing farm workers was so strong that when we had violence that was perpetuated on the farm workers, he went on a 25-day water-only fast. Some people call that a hunger strike. He didn't like to use the word hunger strike because he said it was more of a spiritual offering. So he went 25 days without eating, so to make sure that the workers would remain nonviolent. And even though the farm workers were being attacked, we had farm workers that were being beaten, that they would not respond with violence. And so he was able to get farm workers also to make that commitment. And even when we had some of our people that were killed, and our first martyr, and I'll tell you about the martyrs later on, but he said, we're not going to respond with violence. And then he had a second fast, okay? And the second fast he did in Arizona. And in that fast, dedicated that fast so that the growers could understand and respect the farm workers, because they had passed a law in Arizona that if a farm worker went on strike or a farm worker said boycott anything, like we did the boycott grapes, they could go to prison. Okay, so he did that 25-day water only fast. And then the third fast that he did was against pesticides in our food. And as you know, we have a lot of poisons that are put on our food. The United States of America, we have the highest cancer rate of any country in the world. Many of the farm workers and their families, they have children that are born with deformities. And that all comes from the poisons that they put on the food and on the workers themselves. They would spray the workers with pesticides, have an airplane come over and just spray them all. And I wish I could say that we have gotten rid of the pesticides, but we haven't. That is still an issue that we have. And so hopefully someday we will be able to pass a law to make sure that all of our food is grown organically, that they don't use poisons on our food, and so that people, not the farm workers won't get sick, but also the people that eat the food. So that is what I think distinguishes Cesar from a lot of other leaders, because number one, he was passionate about nonviolence. You know, he really knew that we could win as long as we didn't use any violence. And as I said, even when people were killed, our first martyr was a young woman named Nan Friedman, who was actually from Florida. She had come down to help the farm workers organize because she was a student from Boston University. And then our second martyr was a young Arab named Najib Daifala, and he was killed by a deputy sheriff right here in Kern County, where I live. And the deputy sheriff struck him across the head with a big flashlight, then dragged him along the curbs until he had a brain concussion, and he passed away. And our other three martyrs, Juan de la Cruz, and Rene Lopez and Rufino Contreras, they were all killed by somebody. One of the companies, when Rene Contreras went into, he was a lettuce worker, walked into a field, he was met with a hail of 80 bullets. Our second martyr, Juan de la Cruz, he was standing on the picket line and shot in the heart by a labor contractor. And Rene Lopez, who was about the age, I think, as many of people that are with us today on this event, he organized his company to vote, workers to vote for the union. And when the employer had brought in somebody to work against the union, they pulled up a gun, called Rene over to talk to them. They were sitting in their car. They called Rene over to talk to them, pulled out a gun, shot him in the temple. It was like a cold-blooded murder. But these are the people that really gave up their lives. But when all of those martyrs were killed, every time Cesar would say, we're not going to react with violence. We are going to do a 3-day fast. So everybody that worked with the union had to do a 3-day fast. And some people would make fun of Cesar. I remember, I have to tell you this story to show you how Cesar would react when people would make fun of him. And when he did his last fast that I mentioned, the 36-day water only fast, one of his granddaughters was passing out leaflets inviting people to come to the rally, come to the mass where Cesar was doing his fast. And one of the women that she gave a leaflet to said to her, because she told her, she said, my grandfather's on this fast. And she said to her, I hope your grandfather dies. So she started crying. And then when she went to tell Cesar what the woman had said, she said, Papa, she said, I didn't know what to say to this woman. And he said, when somebody tells you something like that, just tell them, I'll pray for you. And I'll get my grandfather to pray for you also. And so I know many of us have been discriminated against for different reasons, whether it's because of the color of our skin or because, we're women that we get also discriminated against and killed, as we saw with the Asian women that just got killed right close to where you're at over there in Georgia, or people are killed because they belong to the LGBTQ community. And we all know that this is so wrong. In the farm worker movement, we were very strong supporters of our LGBT community. And in fact, whenever they had a pride march, we had all of the farm workers out there with their flags supporting the LGBTQ community. And so I think if we want to honor Cesar Chavez, if we want to honor him on the work that he did, we can model and we can copy what Cesar Chavez did. And when we're doing that, it's not about imitating Cesar Chavez. It's about doing the justice work that still needs to be done. We know that we have a lot of hate in our society, and we have to cure the hatred. When it comes to racism, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, racism is a sickness. So we have to become the healers. We have to become the healers and explain to people, because sometimes they don't understand that this country, our United States of America, it was built by the indigenous people, the Native Americans that were enslaved. When the first immigrants came to this country, which were the immigrants from Europe. So the indigenous people were enslaved. Then, of course, as we know, the Africans that were brought here as slaves. And they, again, built the White House, they built the Congress. Many of the buildings in our country were built by the African slaves. And of course, they enriched, it was their work and their energy that made this country rich. So if we can start attacking racism, then that is going to put us, a little level higher to really live up to the ideal that what we say our country is. We talk a lot about the United States of America, being a beacon and being open, but we know it's not. It's not. We still have a lot of racism in our society. And one of the ways, of course, and I would like all the educators that are listening to see if we can practice this, we have to start teaching all of our children, our students, that we are one human family, that we don't have a lot of different races, really. We have a lot of different ethnic groups, we have a lot of different nationalities and a lot of different cultures, but we only have one human race. And our human race is Homo sapien. That's the scientific name of our human race. And our human race came from Africa. So when we think about that, what does that mean? That means that all of us are Africans. Yes, we may have different colors of skin, hair, colors of eyes, but we are one human race, Homo sapiens. And so we can say to the white supremacists out there, the KKK, the Proud Boys, all the neo-Nazis, just get over it, okay? Because they're all Africans. So we can start ending this whole idea of racism, okay? And also, when we think of slavery, and I should say racism that comes from slavery, because that's where it comes from. When we wanted people to give up their energy and their life to make other people wealthy, this is what the slavery was. And we have kind of the segments of slavery still left today. And as it comes to the domination of women, when women are supposed to work for less and not get paid as much as men. And it comes down to even children when we think of child labor. So it has a lot of ramifications that are not good and that we have to really get rid of in our society. And it also then attests to why we think that people that are darker somehow are less human than we are. And when we think, I mentioned the fact that farmers never had any toilets in the fields. Why would one think that a human being can go all day long without having a bathroom? And can you imagine what that was like for the women that were working in the fields, where women had to make a circle around them so that they could go to the bathroom? That is kind of assuming that somehow these folks were not human. And so we have seen the horrible manifestations of racism and sexism in our society. So we know that we all have to do something to get rid of this, okay? All of us have to work together to make sure that we end racism. And if we can start in our public schools, that would be the first place. If we could have ethnic studies, again, women's studies and gender studies, and then and even labor studies. And the reason that when we think of why do farm workers, why do they need to organize into a union? Because that is how they have their voices heard. They have someone to represent them on the work side if they get fired. They have somebody to speak up for them in the state legislatures, and they have somebody to speak up for them in the Congress. So with all of the work that we did, we were able to get for the farm workers some of those basic rights that they needed, like unemployment insurance and the right to organize. And so farm workers that work under a union contract they retire, they have a pension, and that is really something. And farm workers that don't have a union to represent them probably don't have those rights. And only in California and Hawaii do farm workers have those rights. Unfortunately, in the state where we are having this wonderful event, farm workers do not have the rights to organize. And I almost sure that they do not have unemployment insurance. So the work that Cesar and I started, we still have a lot of work to do. In the state of Colorado, they are just barely talking about giving farm workers overtime and some of the basic rights that they should have, something that industrial workers earned over 82 years ago. So I just want to invite all of the students and folks that are listening to me today to please join us in this struggle, because we know that we can end the racism, the sexism, the homophobia in our society. And also with science, talk to the folks out there that are still kind of in denial that our planet is having a lot of climate change, and the climate change is devastating many, many communities throughout our country. So we have to become the missionaries that are going to go out there and talk to people and talk to people in our family, and especially when it comes to the issues of women's reproductive rights. I am a mother of 11 children. That's a lot of kids. But many of my daughters and my sons, they decide that they don't want that many children. So that some of them have one child or two child or three children, and some of them have 0 kids. And I think that's their choice. And so, there was a great Mexican president named Benito Juarez. He was like the first indigenous president of Mexico after they threw out the Spaniards. And he had a great saying that I want to share with you. His saying was, respecting other people's rights is peace. Respecting other people's rights is peace. And what that means, like myself as a woman, what I decide to do with my body, my human right, it's my business and nobody else's. And the same thing when it comes to someone who lives with, or wants to marry somebody of their own sex, that is their human right. So, and I say this, mention this to you because I think that all of us have people in our lives, maybe family or friends, that haven't quite gotten the message yet. They're not very enlightened, and especially down there in the South, you probably have more people in that category than we do here in California, although not all of California, by the way, is progressive. Now, where I live here in Kern County, it's not. But if we come to missionaries and we can carry those messages forward to say to people, we have to have equal rights for everyone. We have to respect every single person. And not only in our social lives, but also in our political lives. And that we have to fight to make sure that we can get the kind of representation that shares our values about human rights. And so we can work hard to get people like that elected to our state legislatures and to our Congress. And I do want to mention 3 measures that are in the Congress right now. And one of them is about voting rights. And it will affect the people, especially in the South, where state legislatures are passing laws to try to suppress the voting rights of people of color. And the bill I'm talking about in the Congress right now is actually, the number is S1. It's in the U.S. Senate. And what this will do is it will ensure that everybody has the right to vote by mail if they so choose. And not only that, but it will take the money out of the voting system. So people, when they're running for office, they can be paid by us, the taxpayers. So that way, folks like you can run for Congress, and you don't have to be a millionaire to run for the state legislature or for Congress. Okay, that's something that we can do to make sure that our democracy works. There's another bill, and this is for all the women out there, it's the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment, that will ensure that, hey, it will be put into the Constitution of the United States that men and women have equal rights. I think a lot of us just assume that that was already somehow a law. Well, you know what? It isn't. But this year, we can actually make history by making sure that that is put into our Constitution of the United States of America. So I'm going to ask all of you, because you know you could make such a difference if all of you would email your senators or call them on the phone and tell them to support the Voting Rights Act. It's called For the People Act, which will give us our voting rights, and of course also the Equal Rights Amendment for women. If you can do that, you can make history and make sure that these two important laws are passed. Yeah, I like to quote Michael Moore, the film documentarian, and this is what he says: when we wake up in the morning, we wash our face, we brush our teeth, and then we call our congressman. Okay, so we can do that. And you know, the one thing that I learned, and I want to share with you, to organize folks and to get them invited and to get them active in our social movement, we have to just go out there and recruit folks. And like I said before, be a missionary. Explain to them why it's important that they become active. Because if we do not, then we don't have a democracy. If people do not vote, then it's like a football game. You have one team that shows up, and the other team doesn't show up. The team that shows up wins. And so the people that show up when they get elected, because somebody, you know, people didn't vote the right way, didn't vote for people that are going to defend them and work for their rights, then they often win. So we have to make sure that we get progressive people elected that have our values and that are going to fight for us and that they're going to defend us. This is what democracy is all about. And this is what, when I started talking, I talked about this organization that Cesar Chavez and I belong to, the Community Service Organization. That is the way that we were able to make changes, by organizing, by registering people to vote, by getting good people elected, and by passing the laws that we needed. So that's what we have to do. We can really get the things that we really need, like universal health care for everyone. We can get, yes, we have to fight for, and we have to get free college education for every person in the United States of America, just like they have in Europe, in Scandinavia, just like they have in countries of Latin America, and even in little teeny Cuba, which has an economic boycott by the United States. Every person in Cuba has free health care and free college education. The United States of America, we are the richest country in the world. So we don't want to buy that argument when they say there isn't enough money to do this. There is enough money. It's just not in the right places, okay? Because we have 10% of the wealthy corporations and the wealthy families, like the Waltons, the Walmart family, that own 90% of the wealth of the United States of America. But, we can fix that. But we have to fix it by voting, as I said before. And yes, we also want to include the marches and the protests, because you now have many more tools at your disposal than we had when we started organizing. Yeah, we could only do the, family by family type of organizing as we did, but now we can do that, plus letting people know, informing them with our cell phones, our Instagram, our Facebook, and all of the social platforms that we have and the devices that we have to build a really strong movement for social justice. But we have to do it together. Sí se puede.
Thank you so much for your words and decades of experience that you shared with us tonight. I want to invite folks in the chat or that are attending, if you have a question or a reflection, to put in the chat. We'd like to share that with Dolores. It is just a privilege to have you here. I've had the honor of hearing you speak several times at national LGBT conferences. I think the first was Creating Change in Colorado, and then the Time to Thrive. I don't know which city it was, but I've long dreamed of inviting you to come to ECU. So on behalf of everyone at Intercultural Affairs at ECU, thank you for being here with us tonight. Dennis, did you want to say anything?
I can get us started with a question, Dolores, while others think of questions. You know, you ended your remarks with "Si se puede," and you know, I guess the official or unofficial motto of the United Farm Workers, then picked up by the Obama campaign, and I'm sure other movements. This idea of yes, yes, you can, yes, it's possible. Can you speak to that motto, a sort of simple motto of empowerment, and how that came to be, and how that has taken on great significance in our culture with respect to social movements?
Well, the way it happened, actually, I mentioned earlier about Cesar Chavez doing a 25-day water-only fast in Arizona. And the reason he had done that fast is because the governor had signed a bill into law that if farm workers went on strike, they could go to prison. Or if they said boycott anything, they could go to prison. And so we were trying to overturn that law. And Cesar went on this 25-day fast. And I was out there, of course, organizing folks to come and to meet with us. We had a mass every night and a rally. And so I spoke to some of the professional Latinos up there in Phoenix, Arizona. And they said to me, you can do all of that in California, but you can't do it in Arizona. Yeah, here in Arizona, you can't do that. People will not support you. And I said, si se puede, which means yes, yes, we can. We can do it here. And I imagine that sometimes people down there in your area also might think that way also, that somehow that you can't change things. I know when I was growing up, when there was a lot of racism in my neighborhood and in where I was growing up, and I didn't know that you could make those changes. And so when I found out that you can make the changes by organizing people and using direct nonviolent action, that you can make the changes. So I kind of lived that si se puede idea that we can do it, because it also means not only that we together can do it, it also means in Spanish, it means not only we, but it also means I can do it. So that's a very powerful slogan. When people take that to heart, that they have the power to make the changes. And that's, of course, what we do with our organizing. It's just, remind people, you do have the power to make the changes, but you can't do it by yourself. You've got to involve other people, and you've got to, then when you do that, you take direct action. And especially in the areas of our public officials, that's how we make the changes. And as I mentioned before, by registering to people to vote. It's kind of interesting. And this morning, well, today in Connecticut, they are debating a bill about whether to include in their curriculum LGBTQ studies also. And some of the evangelicals are, pushing to exclude that, because they are going to be teaching about the human rights of people of color and of women, but they wanted to take that out of the curriculum. And it's important that we really understand what's going on, that they use the issues of gay marriage, a women's right to abortion, immigration. They use this to divide people. And because the people that are in power, they use that because they don't want people to come together. They don't want people to get organized, because if we can keep coming together, then in coalition and working directly on some of these issues, we can change them. But as I say, they use these issues to keep people confused and to kind of instill that kind of divisiveness and hatred, so that people will not like each other. But we can actually change that. But we just really have to be sure to remember that every person has their human rights, and they need to be respected. As I said before, when I was talking about Benito Juarez, the indigenous president of Mexico.
We do have a question in the chat. It says activism and experiencing oppression are both exhausting. How do you stay energized, keep going, and take care of yourself?
Well, we have to have fun. We have to have fun because the social, the movement on the movement for justice is a long journey. Okay, it's not a short sprint, as they say. So we have to stay strong, and we have to stay committed and not give up. Because if we give up, they win. We can't quit because if we do, the oppressors win. So, but to keep ourselves, we have to, get a lot of sleep. Make sure that we have fun, celebrate every little victory that we have, and even celebrate the work that we're doing. Try to have chants, try to have music. I always like to listen to music. The minute I wake up in the morning, I put music on because music really, it nourishes us. It keeps us spiritually strong. And then have fun with friends. So, we like I said, we want to stay strong. We want to stay healthy. We want to stay committed. And so when something gets in the way, like an obstacle, we just have to go around it, or we have to figure out what tactic we need to do that's different. And we can learn from our mistakes. We can learn from the opponents that come in our way. Because, as I said, the journey's a long one, and we can learn from everyone. And the other thing is, we know that this hatred is out there, and it's hurtful, and it causes pain, and we get angry. But if we can somehow understand that this is coming from ignorance, people are not born racist, children are not born racist or homophobic. This comes from the culture where they grew up or their families. So we just kind of have to forgive them and realize where it's coming from. And that anger that we feel, turn it into a positive energy and pray for them. And then keep educating, because sometimes they may not be ready to hear our message the first time, but eventually, if they hear it loud enough, they hear it strong enough, and from many, many different sources, then they can deal. And I went through that. I went through that journey myself of understanding. And that was on the issue of abortion, because I am the mother of 11 children. So that was a hard one for me, and being a Catholic. But once that I understood it, this is where science is a great teacher. Once that I understood that a person is not a person until they're born, that a fetus is not a child, okay? Once I understood that, then that really, it helped me come to terms with that issue. So, and that's what we have to teach. We have to teach people, yes, we do have a third gender, and that third gender needs to be respected. So it's all about educating. And I always like to say to folks too, especially, it'd be great, like in our high schools, and maybe even in our middle schools, that we can teach about Matthew Shepard, this young man who was murdered because he was gay, a brilliant young man who would have been a great doctor because he was studying medicine, and yet he was murdered because he was gay. And when they murdered Matthew Shepard, the young men that murdered Matthew Shepard, they went into town to try to find a Mexican to kill. And they ran into some Mexican youth, but fortunately, they were strong enough to defend themselves. But the way that they knew who had killed Matthew Shepard is because the gun that they used to hit one of the Mexican kids on the head and to crack his head, they had the hairs of Matthew Shepard on that same gun. So they were able to identify them. And so I know sometimes our struggle seems, I'm not going to say it's hopeless because it's not. Our struggle is very hard. But if we could just, and even celebrate things of the past, like today we're celebrating Cesar Chavez, a person who had to struggle so much. And people, still today, some people don't like Cesar Chavez and they criticize him or whatever. And that's okay. That's just part of the work that we do. But we know that we're on the right path, we're on the right side, and we want to see social justice for everybody, not just for a few people, but for everyone.
There's two questions in the chat, but someone has had their hand raised. So let me ask Jillian to ask her question. Jillian, can we hear you?
Mark, there was a question a little earlier
Go ahead, thanks.
that we may have missed. Let me just read that one first. Um, Dolores, so the question is, can you talk about the biggest challenge you face as an organizer and also as a person more broadly? Biggest challenges as an organizer and as an individual?
Well, the biggest thing I faced actually was racism, because we know that the growers, unfortunately, today are still very racist. With the farm workers themselves and the other people, because the Dolores Huerta Foundation, we're still organizing in low-income communities, and a lot of the people that we organize are immigrants or recent immigrants. But it's fear that we have, and have to get people to overcome that fear. And I think, generally speaking, we have a lot of apathy. We have a lot of apathy that people are not used to becoming activists. And I've thought about this a lot, and I think it comes back to the idea of people that are in power do not want people to get organized, because when they come together and they fight for themselves, then that upsets the power structure. And so that's something that we're all going to be against. And that's why they like to keep everybody divided, because as long as they can keep us divided, then, they have the power, they can do what they want, they have the power and they have the wealth. So I think apathy is, as Helen Keller said, that apathy is one of the evils in human beings that has never been able to be cured. But I think as organizers and healers that we can cure people's apathy, but we have to tell them the stories so that they can understand and that they can get the knowledge that they need, and so that they can join the movement and help us in our fight to erase the wrongs of the past, and also to do the healing that we need, and to keep the foundation of our democracy strong. And we know that our democracy was threatened. Well, it has been threatened all along when you try to keep large numbers of people from voting. But we saw the face of that on January 6th, when people attacked the U.S. Capitol. And we have seen the manifestations also when people get killed, because they're Mexicans or they're Jews or they're gays or because they're women.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions, and we're nearing time. Again, on behalf of everyone at ECU, I just want to thank you for joining us. It is quite a privilege to have you be our keynote for our first commemoration of Cesar Chavez Day. And we thank you for joining us this evening.
So, well, thank you. Could I just say, for the Equal Rights Amendment, I would like to give you a website on that. It's really easy. It's ERAYES, yes, 2021.org. ERAYES 2021.org. And for the Dolores Huerta Foundation, we're DoloresHuerta.org. DoloresHuerta.org. And I just want to thank you very much for inviting me to be there with you. I hope someday soon we can all be together in the physical world. And I always like to just remind everybody, and I don't know if we can unmute any people to do this, but I just like to remind people that, and I ask the question, who's got the power? And the response to that is, we've got the power. And I say, what kind of power? You have to say, people power. Can we do that, Mark? Is it possible to do that?
Can you put on your video?
We can try.
I have been unmuted now, by the way. Thank you.
Good.
I don't think we're gonna have very many people. I don't think it's a very good idea. Going to, but let's do it. Yeah,
Okay, everyone should be unmuted.
we'll have it.
All right, Dolores, do you want to take the lead?
Okay, so this is the way it'll work. I'm going to ask the question, who's got the power? I want everybody to say, we've got the power. And when I say, what kind of power? I want you to say people power. And then we'll end with a hand clap that says, sí se puede, which means, yes, we can. All right? Okay, go. Okay, you ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Who's got the power?
We
Got the power.
What kind of power?
People power.
All right. Are we going to go forward and make our movement stronger, erase all of these inequalities? What do we say? Se puede,
Se
puede.
puede.
Sí,
Se puede.
All right.
Sí,
Thank
se puede.
you. Se puede. Let's do an organized hand clap. Se puede. Let's go.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, if everyone is still on, I have put a eval in the chat. We would appreciate your feedback. And again, on behalf of everyone in Intercultural Affairs, good night and thank you.